Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 24th chapter in the book of Numbers. Herein we read of the third and fourth oracle of a soothsayer known as Balaam, who is hired by Balak, the king of the Moabites. So in the book of Numbers, it pretty much documents the nation of Israel on the march from Egypt to settle in their promised land. And on their journey en route, they encroach on these neighboring nations' territory. And the king of Moab has reason to be concerned because there's this whole host of people coming up from Egypt. They're determined to settle. And what he does is he hires a soothsayer from some about 500 miles to the east. Balaam's location is slightly west of the Euphrates. And he was a soothsayer and sorcerer. These were forbidden practices, but they were common amongst the neighboring nations of Israel. They were forbidden in Israel. He summons for the price of money. He agrees to an exchange of service. In lieu of money, he is hired to curse these people. But in the in the 22nd chapter, when he kind of burst onto the scene, he's visited by Elohim in a dream, and he's also intervened with an angel who speaks to him through his donkey. The donkey literally speaks to him, and it is an angelic intervention. And the key passage of the 22nd chapter, arguably, is the 38th verse, which reads, "And Balaam said to Balak, 'See, I have come to you. Now am I at all able to say somewhat? The word that Elohim puts in my mouth, that I will speak.'" So he's visited by Elohim. He is an authentic deity. Now, the types of people he would have been accustomed to summoning, and the whole practice was Hui, but he had a direct encounter with Elohim himself, and it is an irresistible urge. The force is irresistible, so he doesn't even try to resist it as much as he would like to collect the money. And we read in the 11th verse of the chapter we'll be covering today that he loses his money, but he has a sense of that he's dealing with a force greater than himself, and he is not going to resist. So what Elohim tells him, he's going to repeat, and he will not issue the curse. And just a key passage, arguably in the 23rd chapter, the 19th verse, "El is not a man to lie, nor a son of man to repent. Has he said, and would not do it, or spoken, and would he not confirm it?" So this soothsayer, this foreign soothsayer, is given a revelation of Yahweh's nature and character, or Elohim rather, and he is used, he doesn't endorse the practice of soothsaying. He gives him an authentic revelation, and through that, he blesses Israel. And the first two oracles come before this chapter. They are usually preceded by Balaam instructing his employer Balak to build 7 altars and have 7 bulls sacrificed, and that's what we read of in the before the third oracle in the 29th verse of the preceding chapter. We're going to open with the opening verse of the 24th chapter, which reads, "And when Balaam saw that it pleased Yahweh to bless Israel, he did not go as at other times to seek to use the sorcery, but he put his face towards the wilderness." Once again, it's this irresistible force. He could not curse him when Yahweh was determined to bless them. He was powerless to resist the compulsion of his direct intervention and presence. So the words that he speaks are going to be directly from Yahweh, which just goes to prove that revelation does not guarantee that a person is righteous, because in the 25th chapter we read that he encourages the Israelite people to intermix with the Moabites, and what happens when they sexually indulge with these foreign cultures as they succumb to their idolatrous practices. But for this, while he delivers his oracles, he is faithful, not because he wants to be. He's not a naturally obedient person, but he's contending with an irresistible force which he is powerless to resist. "And Balaam lifted up his eyes and saw Israel encamped according to their tribes, and the Ruah of Elohim came upon him." So Balaam sees what this Balak had seen. He was fearful at the sight and presence of this nation, this army on the march, because that's what they were. And the Ruah of Elohim, that is the source of revelation for all authentic prophets. And this man was not, strictly speaking, a prophet, but prophecy was nevertheless revealed to him. And he took up his proverb and said, the saying of Balaam, son of Beor, and the sayings of the man whose eyes are opened. So the revelation he receives and repeats is directly from one whose eyes had been opened. He had seen the vision of there's no indication that it was a literal sight. He did not see, but his eyes were open to see what perhaps was not immediately physically present. The saying of him who hears the words of El, who sees the vision of El Shaddai, who falls down with eyes opened wide. So two senses are stimulated in this response. The sight of hearing, that's the organ of the ear, and the sense of sight, the vision, so that's the organ of the eye. And so he hears directly the words of Elohim and sees the vision which comes from El Shaddai, that is God Almighty in translation. And he's humbled in submission, so he falls down in worship in abject surrender with his eyes wide open. And what does Yahweh tell him? Well, that's what we're going to read. How good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings of Israel, like wadis that stretch out, like gardens by a river, like aloes planted by Yahweh, like cedars besides water. So he's favorably, metaphorically comparing the tents of the nation of Israel, which is on the march. They were not a settled location, a stationary people, so they resided in tents throughout their wilderness journey. And there were several holidays. I believe one of them was the Festival of Tents, where the Israelites were to live in 7 days on tents on top of their stationary settled locations in the nation of Israel, just to remind them what their ancestors went through to bring them there. He makes water flow from his buckets, and his seed is in many waters. His king is higher than Agag, and his reign is exalted. Now, Agag is an individual we meet eventually. Who Saul contended against, but we gather it might have been a common name amongst the Amalekites. So their king was greater than theirs, and his reign is exalted and will be. And one of the power of this Elohim, who Israel has working on their behalf, is that they have a constant supply of water even when they are traveling in the desert. So they are blessed by him in otherwise unsurvivable scenarios. El, who brought him out of Egypt, is for them like the horns of a wild ox. He devours nations, his enemies, and he breaks their bones, and he strikes through with his arrows. So the Elohim who had redeemed them from Egyptian slavery was working on their behalf in any nation that these newly liberated people will come across, will be consumed and devoured and conquered. There is no stopping them. He has a sense of the inevitability of Israelite, at least their settlement now. During the period of Judges, they would be at the mercy of foreign forces, and their apostasy-induced oppression would become a cyclical reality. But while they were on the march, there was no nation that could contend against them because Elohim was working on their side. He had redeemed them from Egyptian slavery for a purpose, and that was to bring them to the land that had been promised to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. He bowed down, he lay down like a lion, and like a lion, who would rouse him? Blessed is he who blessed you, and cursed is he who curses you. So the image of a lion is a beast of might. They are the mightiest beast of nature, and the lion of the tribe of Judah brings us to Revelation 5:5. That's a reference to Yahshua Messiah. But much of this is immediate. Much of this prophecy has an immediate function to be fulfilled, and also a future portend. So much of this is messianic in orientation. But here we read him reciting the Abrahamic covenant of Genesis 12:3. Blessed are the nations which bless you, and cursed are those that curse you. So he was hired to issue a curse against this nation, but he is overwhelmed by an irresistible force, a superior power that compels him to bless the nation that he is determined to bless, and he does not want to be cursed by the Almighty Maker of heaven and earth, whose chosen people is the Israelite people, who this Moabite king had hired him to issue curses against. Then the displeasure of Balak turned against Balaam, and he struck his hands together. Balak said to Balaam, I summoned you to curse my enemies, and see, you have kept on blessing these 3 times. So this is not the first time he has blessed them. He is commanded to do so because he has the literal presence and the literal voice and the literal vision of Yahweh, their Elohim. So the king who had hired him is disappointed. He had summoned him for an agreed service, which he was determined to pay him for. But as we read in the next verse, he withdraws his investment, his financial investment. And now flee to your place. I said I would greatly esteem you, and see, Yahweh has kept you back from esteem. So this force, this entity, the deity of the Israelite people, has prevented him from collecting what he had agreed to pay him because he had paid him to curse. Now this power working on Israelites' behalf had compelled him to bless, so he had forfeited the reward, but it was still an irresistible urge. He was motivated by money, but he ultimately lost what he treasured most, his entire reason for being there. Now, there are no shortage of men of mammon who use religion in any age for illicit profit, and Balaam was certainly one of them. And Balaam said to Balak, Did I not also speak to your angels, who you sent to me, saying, If Balak should give me his house filled with silver and gold, I am unable to go beyond the word of Yahweh, to do either good or evil of my own heart. What Yahweh speaks, that I speak. So much of what we earlier read in the 38th verse of the 22nd chapter, he has to say whatever he's told. He is his own independent inclinations are irrelevant because he has this superior force overwhelming him, and no amount of money can cause him to go beyond the word of Elohim, word of Yahweh, which he is receiving and repeating. And now see, I am going to my people. Come, let me advise you what this people is going to do to your people in the latter days. So this is a far-sighted prophecy. This actually marks the 4th oracle or revelation or prophecy. It's not strictly speaking a prophecy in the fullest sense of the word, but it is a revelation of him. So this is the 4th and final one. And it pertains to the latter days. This has a futuristic connotation, and he's giving him advice about what is going to happen. And because this force, which is compelling him to speak, is irresistible, any nation that he is determined to devour and consume and conquer and control will be equally powerless to resist this overwhelming force working on his chosen people's behalf. And he took up his proverb and said, The saying of Balaam, son of Beor, and the sayings of the man whose eyes are opened. So that's the second time we read the word proverb. We earlier read it in the 3rd verse, and also in the 3rd verse we read that his eyes had been opened. So he had been summoned to, work he was a purveyor of esoteric, forbidden, illicit religious practices, which were the common currency of the neighboring nations. But he, when he is confronted by Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, he does not resort to sorcery. Eventually, we read, at least in some other translations. The saying of him who hears the words of El, and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of El Shaddai, who falls down with eyes wide open. So once again, he's compelled to submit an abject surrender. The words are not his own, but they are the authentic words of a distinctly divine entity, the likes of which he would have never encountered in his soothsaying practice or his sorcery, because they summoned up spirits and ethereal entities which had no metaphysical substance outside of the imagination of those who attributed substance or reality to them. I see him, but not now. I observe him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and shall smite the corners of Moab, and shall destroy all the sons of Sheth. So this star and scepter is quite clearly a messianic allusion. We read of the scepter in Genesis 49:10. This is the Jacob son of Judah, through whom the Davidic dynasty would spring and rise and rule. And so this has a future connotation some 400 years hence, and also 2,400 years hence, with the Messiah, who is the scepter and the star of Jacob, which is Israel, and that the nation of Moab is doomed, as are the sons of Sheth. Sheth were the original inhabitants before they were displaced by the Moabites, who were the nation born of one of Lot, Abram's nephew's incestuous liaison with his daughter. Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt for the sin of looking back at Sodom and Gomorrah when it was destroyed. So his daughters get him drunk and seduce him, and through their incestuous liaison, two nations are born, one of which is Moab. And Edom shall be a possession, and Seir shall be a possession. Enemies, and Israel is doing mightily. Edom was the nation sprang from the loins of Esau, who is the older twin brother of Jacob. Jacob is Israel. He's mentioned in the preceding passage, but they're going to be owned and controlled, and eventually they go extinct. And this is largely on account of their treachery with the Babylonian invaders, who they collaborate in the looting and destruction of Jerusalem when they come. But their alliance is eventually going to be betrayed. And by the passage early in Malachi, we read that Malachi is reciting the common complaint, the chorus of complaint, that Yahweh does not love Israel, and he proves it by showing that Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Now the word hated, I feel the better translation is rejected, and it ultimately distorts something of Yahweh's nature, because he doesn't hate people or even groups of people. He hates certain things, and he hates sin, and he hates wickedness, but he does not hate any nation or people, because they all owe their origin to him. And a ruler shall come from Jacob, and destroy the remnant from Er. So this ruler is ultimately the Messiah, who will rule not only the nation of Er, but also in the millennial kingdom. This ruler who sprang from Jacob through David's loins, through Judah, would destroy not only the nation of Er, but also the entire world and the millennial kingdom. This is a yet-to-be-fulfilled prophecy. This is the dispensation which awaits us, the millennial dispensation, when the Messiah will conquer the earth with sword in hand, and the rulership of the earth, which was ceded by Adam to Satan, will return to its correct creator and owner. And he looked then on Amalek, and he took up his proverb and said, Amalek was first among the nations, but his latter end is to perish forever. So that's the third time we read the word proverb, and Amalek were a mighty nation in the ancient world, but they would be no more. So much of the nations and the geopolitical entities which control the balance of power for a fleeting period of time, eventually and inevitably they perish forever. That's going to happen to the United States of America, and nowhere in our Constitution is it written that the American Empire or even Republic will endure forever. He then looked up on the Canaanites, and he took up this proverb and said, Firm is your dwelling place, and your nest is placed in the rock. But Cain is to be burned. Till when does Assyria keep you captive? Ashur would have been the nation of Assyria, which would eventually overwhelm, conquer, and scatter the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes who had seceded from the Davidic dynasty on account of their abuse and excesses in the building projects under the reign of Rehoboam. But Assyria will eventually be conquered themselves by Babylon, who in turn will be conquered by Persia, who in turn will be conquered by Greece, who in turn will be conquered by Rome, who in turn will be conquered by the barbarians. So the lesson learned is that no empire lasts forever. It is fleeting and temporary to have control over the temporal dimension of the earth. And he took up his proverb and said, "Oh, who lives when El does this?" So that's the fifth time we read the word proverb, and the term proverb in this context is some slightly similar but slightly different from the literary device of proverb. It's more a broader application of a word with meaning. So I didn't define it in the earlier times I recited them. That's something I wish I did earlier, but I do it now. But no one's the question of who will live when El does this is who can live, but those who are submitted voluntarily to him. And ships shall come from the coast of Kittim, and they shall afflict Assyria, and afflict Eber, and so shall Amalek, and he also perishes. So all these nations are designed to perish, but he promises the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, they will last forever. So they will be a nation and a people all the way up till the end times. And that's just the way it was designed by Yahweh. They never aspired for geopolitical dominance or empire, but their nation still survives. It had a long hiatus from the age of the Gentiles, but beginning in 1948, they were restored to a fully functioning and independent sovereignty. And Balaam arose and left, and returned to his place, and Balak also went his way. Balaam, remember, was from west of the Euphrates River, some 500 miles away, and Balak was the Moabite king, so their business is concluded. There's nothing more for him to do. But we read in the chapter which comes after this that Balaam is in fact a destructive influence who does compel the nation of Israel to intermingle with the Moabites sexually, and in so doing they succumb to idolatry, which is precisely the reason they were commanded not to intermarry with these forbidden people. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.